A young Jewish law student sits in a lecture hall in Bucharest. His ribs are still sore from the blows he took that morning. He opens his notebook and writes, 2 punches during today's lecture, 8 pages of notes, good value for 2 punches. That student was Mikhail Sebastian, and those sentences, written 80 years ago, tell us more about Jewish endurance than any monument ever could. They remind us that dignity can survive when safety does not, that meaning can persist when power is gone. To say it is an honor to be here at the Holocaust Museum feels like the wrong phrase, especially at a time like this, because what words can one use when asked to speak before, on behalf of, and as witness to the Kehillah, the community to which he belongs, facing the greatest challenges to Jewish life in 80 years. What possible hope can a man of 44 have, a man raised in relative safety and comfort, when addressing a people whose memory is bound to the greatest Hurban, the greatest destruction in human history? For this is Melbourne, a city built by survivors and their children, who came here seeking safety and surety, perhaps more than anywhere else on earth. And how can an artist speak about art in a world where people are dying, alliances collapsing, families fracturing, and old hatreds returning? At times it feels almost indecent to speak of beauty at all. The German Jewish philosopher Theodor Adorno famously said that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. That line has been repeated so often it's become a kind of cliché of despair, a symptom of the very illness it describes. Yet, what Adorno meant, I think, was simpler and harsher, that to be merely poetic, which is decorative or beautiful or innocent, is no longer possible. When the Holocaust occurred, a crime so total it broke language itself, meaning had to change. Beauty, nobility, honor, tenderness, all were compromised. After all, the Nazis were not savages, they were educated Europeans. They loved Goethe, Hölderlin, and Schubert. They painted, they wrote, they sang hymns, and then they went to work in the camps where millions languished, including my own extended family. The Viennese Jewish writer Stefan Zweig saw this rupture clearly when he wrote of his parents, and I quote, "They were prosperous people who grew rich, then even very rich, and wealth comfortably draft-proofed your windows and walls in those times. Their way of life seems to me typical of the Jewish middle classes that had made significant contributions to Viennese culture, only to be exterminated root and branch by way of thanks." No artist captures this hefsek, this break in meaning, more than Paul Celan. Born Paul Ancel in Bukovina, Romania, Celan began as a symbolist poet. After the war, after his mother's murder in Auschwitz and his own internment in a labor camp, he faced the unanswerable question, how can a Jewish poet, bearing witness to the incommensurable, ever write again? Celan did the most Jewish thing you can imagine. He took the language he loved, which was his mother tongue, German, and transfigured it. Translation itself became expression. In Atemwende, or breath turn, his poems are acts of linguistic tikkun, repair. Each word is a nitzotz, a divine spark torn from its vessel. Poetry for Celan was no longer song, but survival, the stammer of a man speaking through smoke. Let me be clear, nothing was redeemed by the Shoah. Art was not improved. Humanity really learned no lesson. The hunger for power and purity still lives in the world. But nevertheless, something endured. The act of silent communion, devekut, the clinging of the soul to what little light remains. After those 6 years, art became whisper, breath, broken song. It ceased to speak and began to stammer. It learned to bear the sight of blood. It became what prayer once was, not a bridge to a powerful God, but a fragile means of surviving existence itself. And even now, in a world of hashtags and slogans, tribalism and tawdriness, this remains our greatest Jewish act of resistance. Let the world shout, we will whisper. Let hatred bray, we will build meaning. Let conspiracies multiply, we will keep writing broken poetry and mending stolen songs. We must risk depth in a shallow age and even tolerate being misunderstood. This, for me, is what it means to be an artist, and especially a Jewish artist, after the Shoah. Art matters because it resists utility. It is lishma, for its own sake. That is its morality. We are Am HaSefer, the people of the book, and the word is our source. Music, poetry, painting, these are how we speak into tohu, the void from which divine light, scattered into sparks, awaits repair. I am not frum whatsoever, nor a believer in any conventional sense. I am really a lazy observer of the prayers that shaped my family for centuries, born of ancestors like the Baal Shem Tov. But yet it is in this post-religious world that I feel myself returning to their impulse, if not their creed, to that same midrashic urge to wrest meaning from silence. What the world lacks is Kodesh, the sacred. Not religion, but ritual, the shared patterns built into our nervous system. When the sacred collapses, ideology rushes in. Deprived of belonging, we invent counterfeit religions, purity rituals of inclusion and exclusion, ideology as identity, trauma as badge. Performance replaces conviction. Moral theatre replaces moral courage. Words are cheapened, drained, returned to the tehom, the abyss from which they came. But we, the people of the word, endure. After thousands of years of decrees, pogroms, and exiles, we carry the book, the manuscript, the song. We are both of the land and beyond it. We speak almost every language on earth, yet share a glance, a shrug, a joke that says everything. We sing a song, we light a ner, we pour wine for Eliyahu, and when hatred comes, we smile. Our bodies may be brittle, but our neshama, our soul, is unbreakable. That is why the Jew is hated in every generation, because the Jew remains intact in a broken world. We cannot be neatly classified. We are nation, we are people, we are religion, we are culture, we are argument and melody. We come in many colors, we exist in contradiction, and that contradiction is our strength. This is necessary, but also threatening to a world poised on a precipice. For the old is falling away and something new must come. Art, whether music, poetry, or painting, is how we cradle what comes next without pretending to control it. And so, there is, even in a world like this one, I believe, reason to celebrate, even amidst confusion and pain. I am suddenly reminded of that terrible film, The Devil Wears Prada. Anne Hathaway, the plain Jane as it were, walks in wearing a drab jumper, and Meryl Streep dismantles her illusion of individuality. She traces that sweater's lineage from Oscar de la Renta to Yves Saint Laurent to the clearance bin. Even our cliches have a lineage. The slogans of social media activism, the moral theatrics that mistake visibility for virtue, they borrow their cadences from Jewish voices who once fought for dignity not only for Jews but for all humanity. Their rhythm, their moral pitch, their justice, redemption, and repair are ours. Thinkers like Walter Benjamin and Martin Buber began those conversations. Jewish humanists who valued experience over ideology, relationship over system, meaning over mechanism. The artist's role then is like that, I believe, of an ancient shepherd, gathering what strays, not to possess it, but to guide it, to return, not nostalgically, but essentially. As Jews, we can be custodians of a culture open to renewal and rebirth. We can defy the algorithm and the cheap assignation. With our immense legacy comes immense responsibility to ensure it is neither defaced nor diminished. We are Or Lagoyim, a light unto the nations, custodians of Tikkun Olam, heralds of a world where all people, Jew and non-Jew, man and woman, gay and straight, black and white, are once more rendered luminous, each a vessel for the same scattered light. That's why I began with Mihail Sebastian. His notebook became his world, a record not just of what he studied, but how he endured. He listened to his friends debate communism and Zionism, right and wrong, hope and despair, just like today. And faced with hatred, instead of shouting, he wrote, quietly and with dignity. In those pages, he carved out a small, stubborn space of freedom, a place where thought could survive when everything else conspired to beat it out of him. Others have done this too, across many cultures and epochs, but I like to think that this Jewish mode of resistance, through art, through scrutiny, through the joke, uttered in the wilderness, is our particular gift to humanity, a seed scattered through the forest, carried on ships, translated, reborn. If Jews have been the carriers of the artistic breath, then this must be more than inheritance. I believe it must also be responsibility. Judaism, if it is to renew itself again, as it did after Babylon, as it did after Rome, as it did after the Shoah, must resist the seductions of the algorithm and the outrage cycle. In the face of the dilution of ideas and the inflation of noise, we must move in the opposite direction, away from performance and towards depth, away from certainty and towards nuance, away from rage bait and towards global citizenship, even in the face of hatred. I was actually asked to speak tonight about keeping memory alive, the power of music. My conviction is that the Jew must do this by counteracting the age itself. Let us write essays instead of status updates. Let us compose poetry instead of purity tests. Let us play Gershwin instead of declaring in-groups and out-groups. Let us tell jokes when the humorless hate us. Let us remember that the best resistance is to reflect hatred back on itself, and that there is no greater way to do this than with art. Once again, I am drawn to Mihail Sebastian, birth name Joseph Hechter, one of the 20th century's most criminally underrated authors. The great Romanian philosopher Ionescu agreed to write the preface to Sebastian's second novel, For 2,000 Years, a work shaped by Sebastian's experience as a Romanian Jew. 20 years older than Sebastian, Ionescu was the editor of the ultra-nationalist daily The Word, which later became the official mouthpiece of the Iron Guard and counted Eliade, Sioran, and Sebastian himself among its contributors. His preface, however, turned out to be a scathing denunciation of both author and book, and I quote, "It is an assimilationist illusion, the illusion of so many Jews who sincerely believe they are Romanian. Are you Joseph Hechter, a human being from Braila on the Danube? No, you are a Jew from Braila on the Danube. You are a Jew." But here is the crucial part of the story. Confronted with this betrayal from a supposed friend, Sebastian chose not to fight back or confront Ionescu. Rather, he published the novel exactly as it stood, including Ionescu's unedited preface, which enraged him. I try, in my own way, to channel Sebastian's inner strength, especially in the light of the last few years when I too was subjected to the oldest hatred in the world. Few people know this, but I never had a bar mitzvah. I refused, partly out of rebellion, partly out of arrogance. I wasn't interested in shul. I thought myself too modern, too clever. But now, looking back, I see those refusals somewhat differently, as inchoate expressions of Jewish resistance. The refusal to conform simply because conformity was expected. And yet, as I grow older, and as the ghosts of my grandparents hover beside me, washing the dishes, scolding me for the wrong bus, for being late again, or for not wearing slacks like Ridge from Bold and the Beautiful, I realize I have, in my own way, become more Jewish than ever. Not observant, not righteous, just present to inheritance. I no longer try to be the good Jew. I don't laugh along at jokes that cut too close, or nod politely when Jewish identity is reduced to a punchline. It's not from pride, but from responsibility. My writing and music are steeped in Judaism. To create is to distill human experience so that it can be reflected back to itself. And who has done that better than our poets and prophets, our storytellers and sages who turned suffering into meaning? Jeremiah and Miriam, Hillel and Akiva, Hannah Arendt and Walter Benjamin, Emmanuel Levinas, all of these people showed that to think is to care, and that interpretation can be an act of mercy, that meaning can be drawn even from ashes. And they remind me of something else, that the Jew is not a moral archetype, but a human being. What matters is not so much being better, but being truer to the inheritance of questioning, of study, of wrestling with meaning. Jewish life has never been about moral superiority. It has been about moral attention, staying awake in the long night of history. And that vigilance has not been ours alone. I think of William Cooper, the Yorta Yorta elder, who led a march to the German consulate in Melbourne in 1938 to protest the persecution of Jews. His act of solidarity, the only known private protest against Kristallnacht anywhere in the world, reminds us that moral attention crosses nations, faiths, and histories. It is a light handed from one people's suffering to another's conscience. I often recall the line, "The Jew is like any other being, any other human being, only more so." Thinkers like Arendt, Buber, Benjamin, different as they were, understood that the Jew, though endlessly cast as other, is in fact the West's disavowed conscience, the recurring outsider who thrives precisely in moments of liberal democracy, artistic fecundity, and tolerance, yet remains restless even when things are good. Anti-Semitism, then, is not just prejudice. It is a metaphysical toxin, a flaw woven into the fabric of Western thought. That is why it mutates endlessly and why it cannot be eradicated by reason alone. It lives between words, just like art does, but where art deepens, anti-Semitism diminishes. The Jew becomes the scapegoat of every stupidity, cast by both extremes as the schemer, the upbraider of values, and yet the maker of music, philosophy, theatre, and poetry that the anti-Semite still happily consumes with pleasure. The Jew who, despite ridicule, calumny, collective blame, and clickbaiting, keeps trying stubbornly and absurdly to make the world a little better. That is what it means for me to be a Jewish artist in 2025. To be imperfect but enduring, humble to history, a steward of time and tradition, aware that, as Rabbi Soloveitchik said, chaos lives in each of us, and it is our duty to hold it at bay. This philosophy of life, this Yiddishkeit of being, touches everything I do. When I open a book, begin an essay, or sit at the piano, I face not certainty but invitation, a jumble of ink, or worse, a field of white space waiting to be named. To write, to play, to think, all of it is a form of midrash, a reaching beyond the surface. Meaning, as the American poet Emerson saw and our sages knew, is not fixed but concentric. It's an expanding circle without end. But this is not postmodern nihilism. It is acceptance that the final meaning will never be reached. It is humility. As the Torah teaches, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, lo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. Forgive my pronunciation. It is not upon you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. To be Jewish is to keep working, to wrestle with God or with silence or the blank page, even when we do not know if anyone is listening. To be Jewish is to accept that one is a legatee of history, including the catastrophe of history, a catastrophe that did not begin or end with the Shoah, but continues each and every day. To be a Jew is to stand on the fault line of the faulty conception of progress, to see and to know what history will present based on what history has always done. But it is also to do what Primo Levi did in Auschwitz and find purpose and direction in one's own spirit, meaning in movement, pockets of resistance in everyday life. It is in the simplest things that life, in all its cruelty and absurdity, can make sense, if only for a few moments. I think back now to Tommy Tiko, the great Hungarian Jewish maestro and Holocaust survivor, who right at the end of his life was in Montefiore home, which, as we would all know here, is strictly kosher. And I went in to visit Tommy once. He was already paralyzed down one side of his body from a terrible stroke. Knowing what he had been like back in the day, vivid, sprightly, indomitable, it was very hard to witness. So in an effort to lighten things up a bit, I said to Tommy, what do you want me to get you something from a cafe? And he said to me, Simon, get me a fucking ham sandwich. I never forgot that moment. In a simple joke, no more than a few words, Tommy could express the entirety of Jewish history. Resistance, deprivation, devastation, irony, absurdity. Tommy's request for a ham sandwich was a joke, of course, but it was also something else. It was an act of rebellion disguised as comedy, a last assertion of freedom from within the strictures of both religion and history. In that single, irreverent line, he embodied centuries of sermons, the defiant humour of a people who refuse to be defined by what was done to them and who will continue, in spite of everything, to argue with each other and others, and to love and build the fabric of the countries that have welcomed them. Because Jewish survival has never been just about surviving. It has been about transforming survival into consciousness, turning trauma into texture. It's not that we remember because we cannot forget. It's that we choose not to let forgetting become a virtue. The difference is moral, not merely historical. Every generation of Jews has faced its own catastrophe and asked the same question, what now? After Babylon, rebuild. After Rome, reinterpret. After Spain, wander and write. After Auschwitz, bear witness. And now, after everything, in the face of new challenges, louder voices, the age of outrage theatre, we face a new kind of trial. One not of persecution, but of distortion. I will say on a personal note that these last months have not left me untouched. Since October 7, the rupture has not been only geopolitical or historical, it has reached into private lives, mine included. Friendships and relationships have fractured, certainties collapsed, conversations I once trusted have turned cold. I felt the same dislocation so many Jews have felt, the shock of seeing the moral ground shift under our feet, and of realizing that what we thought was secure was only provisional. Yet even in that rupture, I've discovered something truer, that Jewish endurance is not a metaphor from history, but a living muscle, one that we are still using and one I know in my own body. We are witnessing a grotesque moral inversion, where the vocabulary of justice has been stolen and weaponized against the people who invented it, where images of suffering are used not to awaken conscience, but to extinguish it, where compassion itself has been corrupted by ideology, to declare a position rather than affirm humanity. This is the horseshoe of history. The far left and the far right, once mortal enemies, now meet in the same shadow. They share the same contempt for nuance, the same romance with purity, the same desire to erase complexity in favour of moral spectacle. What unites them is not ideology, but exhaustion, a hatred of ambiguity and a terror of self-doubt. And so the language of empathy becomes a cudgel. The rhetoric of liberation becomes a mask for cruelty. Images of human suffering are used not to awaken conscience, as I said, but to extinguish it. empathy itself a weapon, the human face a banner. It is a new form of barbarism dressed in the language of virtue, a barbarism not of ignorance, but of moral exhaustion. People too tired to think, too shallow to discern, too performative to feel, so they must make noise, any noise, to paper over the void within. That is why Jewish artists and Jewish thinkers must continue to create. Not because art can save us, but because it can remember us. Because in the ruins of language, the poem, the symphony, the ham sandwich joke, the line of commentary, these are all that remain uncorrupted. Paul Celan, who I mentioned earlier, called his poems messages in a bottle. He threw them into the sea of language, hoping that they might reach someone, somewhere, who could still hear. That, I think, is what every Jewish artist does, writes against the current of forgetfulness, knowing most bottles will never be found, but that the act of composition and being cast into the air or waters of culture is a conversation with the cosmos. In this sense, art is not just self-expression for me, it is self-preservation. Every Jewish creative act, whether it's a sonata on the piano, a midrash, or Jerry Seinfeld doing a stand-up routine, is a refusal to allow history to close over us like water. And so we return again to the act of creation. When I play Gershwin on the piano, that miraculous synthesis of Yiddish lament and American optimism, I'm reminded that joy itself can be a form of defiance, that to make something beautiful in the aftermath of horror is not naive, but sacred, because beauty is not the opposite of horror. It's what remains when horror has spent itself. It's the echo of the divine still vibrating in us. But in many respects, we live now at a time allergic to beauty. Beauty requires discernment, hierarchy, attention, all qualities our culture treats as elitist. It demands time, patience, humility before form. Difficulty takes time. Difficulty reminds us of our finiteness. Difficulty confounds reductive notions of identity. To be an artist now is therefore more important than ever, for it is to resist distraction itself, to insist that attention, patience, and waiting still matter in an age intoxicated by immediacy. To sit with ambiguity, to let meaning unfold slowly, is almost unfashionable and therefore all the more necessary. The modern world rewards outrage. Judaism rewards interpretation. One screams, the other studies. One asserts, the other asks. And so to live Jewishly, to think Jewishly, and this I should add, is most certainly not limited, I would say, to Jewish people, is to refuse the flattening of discourse that turns everything into sides. It is to hold complexity even when the mob demands simplicity. When I write, I try to keep this in mind, that meaning must be wrested from silence, not shouted from rooftops, that the moral seriousness of art lies not in its message but in its method. For me, music remains the purest form of that resistance. Notes don't lie. They don't perform. They either ring true or they don't. A phrase played dishonestly betrays itself instantly. There is no algorithm for sincerity. Perhaps that's why totalitarian regimes always tend to distrust art, especially art made by Jews. They sense that real art can't be coerced, can't be made to chant. It moves according to its own laws, like conscience. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote that ethics begins in the face of the other, in the recognition that the other calls me to responsibility. It's a profoundly Jewish idea that relation precedes ideology, that duty precedes choice, that we are answerable even when we do not agree. Even now, when every screen confronts us with faces pleading to be seen, that responsibility remains indivisible. Compassion is not a zero-sum game. This too, I think, is art's task, to make us answerable again, to restore the human face to what politics has turned into abstraction. And so the Jewish artist must not only remember, he must also rehumanize. He must resist the temptation to dehumanize even those who would deny him or her that same humanity. He must take what history dehumanized and restore its form, its dignity, its breath. To write is to listen to the dead without letting them silence the living. To play is to make audible the silence that follows atrocity, not to fill it, but to honour it. Our ancestors built cathedrals of commentary. We must build cathedrals of attention, in prose, in music, and in thought, because the danger now is not only forgetting the Holocaust, it is misunderstanding it, treating it merely as metaphor, as currency, as cudgel. It deserves reverence, not repurposing. To keep memory alive is not to repeat the past endlessly, but to let it instruct us silently, to live with ghosts, but not become them. The danger of our age, I believe, is not forgetting what was done to us, but forgetting what we must not become. Again, I think of Primo Levi, who said that understanding Auschwitz is impossible, but remembering it is necessary. And I think too of those who can no longer remember, those for whom the word Jew is just another symbol to be filled with someone else's meaning. Our duty, my duty, is to empty that word of hatred and fill it again with life, with wit, with learning, with the stubborn insistence that the word, the logos, still matters. And perhaps that's where I'll end, with words. Because for all the music I play, all the notes I strike, I remain bound to language. The Jew is never far from the book, even when the book is silent. Sebastian's notebooks, Celan's poems, my grandmother's own memoirs. They all say the same thing in different ways. We lived, we saw, we bore witness. We made meaning when meaning seemed impossible. To be a Jew then is to keep writing even when the page is white with fear, to keep playing even when the notes are drowned by noise, to keep believing not in redemption but in responsibility, and to know that humour and holiness are not opposites but allies, that to laugh at despair is to wound it, and that the ham sandwich is as sacred as the psalm when it's offered in the right spirit. So yes, in some ways you could say it's indecent to speak of art when people are dying. But indecency is not always wrong. Sometimes it's the only moral act left, to insist on creation in the face of destruction. That is the secret our ancestors understood, from Jerusalem to Vilna to Melbourne, that the opposite of death is not life but meaning, and that meaning, fragile though it is, still flickers in our songs, in our books, in our laughter. We are not the people of despair. We are the people of commentary. We are the people of and yet. We are the people of the question, of the qualification. The world has tried to silence that phrase for 3,000 years, and yet it returns today, right now. And yet we write, and yet we sing, and yet we live. That, my fellow Jews and Gentiles, is how memory survives. Not in monuments of stone, but in the living voice, trembling, cracked, but still speaking. It is not upon us to complete the work, but neither are we free to desist from it. And so we begin again. Shema Yisrael, listen. Thank you.